Our next presenter is the coordinator of a program within the Brooklyn High School in Brooklyn, Massachusetts. It's referred to as a school within a school. She spent 3 years working in a magnet school before going to the school within a school, and she has been there for 21 years. This is also a democratic school where she says students are in charge, which is not unique. I think they're in charge everywhere, aren't they? But anyhow, I'd like you to welcome Elaine Kaplowitz.
Since I come from a democratic school in which the students are involved in all the decisions, I'd just like to ask all of you whether you really need 5 more minutes before you sit for another hour and a half. So I'd like to, I don't mind taking 5 of my minutes, but out there, including me, are thinking, who are these superhuman people that are running all these schools, that are working in the schools? When Len was describing his school, I thought, wait, how many of him are there and how many other people to do all these miraculous things? Because all of us in education know how hard it is and how draining and how involving and how much there is to take home. And the flip side of it is the side that I think many of us get, and I certainly consider myself one of those people. And I say that because my school is like a family, and the people that I work with, whom I've worked with now for most of the 21 years that I'm there, are also like my family. And I noticed at the beginning of the day, one of the things that Daria said was one of the strengths of people in Wyoming Valley is the sense of a family-centered community and family values that are strong and people related and knowing one another and knowing where people come from. And it's a strength, I think, that people here could draw from, and I hope that you will think about it when I say some of the unusual things about my school, that it's all based on a kind of family model, a collegiality, a getting to know one another as people, and you'll hear other terms from the other speakers, so that we're not just professionals or we're not just the teacher. In the school where I work, we all share roles and we share responsibilities. The teachers do some of the counseling. The counselor, who's me, once in a while is teaching. They do some of the administering. The kids are involved in everything. And what that means also is that we get to know one another as people. We get to know strengths and weaknesses and to try to work with those and accept them. In our school, staff and students don't have to hide what they're good and not so good in. It's very common to come into a staff meeting and say, oh, I had the worst class today. I don't know what it was. This and such didn't work. I'm really struggling with this issue. And I know that people have told me often in other schools or other situations where they've worked, one was supposed to come into the teacher's room and just smile and go, well, everything just went just perfectly for me today, and this was just the best, and I can handle it, because either your supervisor is there or you don't want to look incompetent. And none of this is about competence, but rather about trying hard and seeing what works, and the kind of day-to-day movement being where the students are and where the teacher is. And all of that is part of what I think of as a strength of the school, and a way in which I get to work in a place where I'm not just the boss. I'm called the coordinator. My job is equivalent in our school of a dean or an assistant headmaster. I don't know what you guys call them in your schools. And also I am guidance counselor for my school, but I am not hierarchically the head of the school. I have persuasive authority. And if I can't use my persuasive authority, I don't necessarily get to make decisions. For many people, that would be real difficult. I often feel not only let off the hook sometimes, but also know that I can call upon the ideas, the creativities, the brains of the other people that I work with, the other students, who often see things better or have a different perspective from me, and I'm not always just relying on my own perspective to be the leader of the school. And as I said, I'm telling you this because a lot of what our school is personal, and I think I could probably just say 4 or 5 things and sit down. You may at this point wish I did, but in any case, I'll tell you the 4 or 5 things, then we'll see. One is that small is better. Other people have told you that, and I'm going to say that too. When schools get, most of us that are here today, if I can speak for the others, believe that education should be personal, that kids should know their teachers, teachers should know the kids, and when you are teaching, you're not just teaching a subject matter, but you're teaching subject matter to a group of people for a certain amount of time. Our math teacher, I always describe him as a conductor. He reminds me much more of an orchestra conductor, and if anybody sat in his math room and you watched his math room, you would literally see him with his hands up sometime, going like this with one student while he's quieting the people over there and pointing, and he's got everybody kind of moving at his or her own pace, and this may mean shut up, or it may mean wait. You're the kind of person that is so impatient when you're learning math that you can't wait until I explain before you get confused and are in there asking the question. But if you just could hold that off a little, I'm going to get to you. And it's a wonderful medley of voices. The kids work together. They work cooperatively. This is not a bell curve, and this is not who's the A students. It's can we all master. We're all there to master the subject matter together. We not only have a smaller school where we get to know the kids, the teachers have the same students over time. Our math teacher has many of the same students for 3 years, sophomore, junior, and senior year. Now, the first question anyone should be asking me in the audience is, what if the guy ain't good? I don't want my child in that class. And the basics in our school is you've got to be competent. You're not going to last if you're competent, and competence is the given that we all start with. With a competent teacher, sharing students over time means, as I said before, you get to know the individual differences, you get to know your students, and although we have a traditional curriculum, we do tailor it according to where kids are and what their learning styles are. We also share space, and that would be another thing I would suggest, that for any program to work, you cannot have the administrator on floor 1. You can't say, okay, the principal of the building will administrate the program, which is going to be around the corner. And these kinds of programs won't work unless you're there in the room, reading faces, following things, and seeing how they go. So the staff and the students and the contiguous staff have to be sharing similar space and space that's ownership. And the staff has to share time together, time to have staff meetings, time to talk about students, time to see one another, not just have such a full schedule of teaching that they don't have time to share information. And in our case, and in terms of a democratic school, we share power and responsibility with each other, as I described before, and we share it with our students. So in our school, we have a school that is in a comprehensive high school of now close to 2,000 students in the town of Brookline, Mass, across the Charles River. I just said that so you'd know it was in Boston, from where Len is. And our school is, Brookline is surrounded by Boston pretty much. It's a town. It's a 50,000 person town, which is quite large. I think it's the largest town in Massachusetts. And we are the only high school in the town, and it draws from 8 elementary schools. In 9th grade, my program does not draw 9th graders because we don't feel kids are developmentally ready, and also because we want them to experience the high school itself before they make decisions about whether they wanted to come to our program. So we have 110 or so kids, sophomores, juniors, and seniors, and you can enter any of those years. And the students come to us and then are in this separate unit for part of the time. So we are, I think someone before asked about how a school within a school that can work in a public high school. That's what we are. That's what we've been doing, and we've been doing it since 1970, quite successfully with a waiting list. And we are integrated very much into the mainstream of Brookline High School. I sit on the administrative council. All the teachers go to their individual curricular departmental meetings. English, we have teachers in English, in mathematics, in social studies, and in science. And at the same time, they come to all of our departmental meetings, and they are a part of and mostly focused on our school. And the reasons that some of the students come to our school are varied. And let me tell you a little bit about the kids, and a little about our town meeting, and then I want to also show a tape, and then I'm going to stop for a minute. And tell you a little about Brookline. Brookline is also a town that's quite diverse. We have students from about 60 countries. They speak over 50 languages. Some are immigrants, and some have been there for a while. They have very interesting backgrounds. And we're kind of urban and suburban school combined, which is unusual. Our goals for our students are that the students are responsible for their own education. They're actively participating in classes. We do not believe in passive learning, but rather active learning. They share the democratic decision making. They are more personal and less hierarchical, and that we all develop what we call a sense of community and a sense that we are all trying to be together for what this 1, 2, or 3 years to make their learning real and personal, and to make people be very involved in their own learning. We share the goals of Brookline High School. We're looking for the kids to do well in school. We want there to be good, excellent teachers. We want to involve in collaborative relationships. We think about respect for human differences. And as I said, we're a separate unit, and you might want to say to me, who are your students? We have a very wide range of kids that would like to come to the school and that do come to the school. Some of them are bright, creative kids that just wanted to be in a place where they could be in English classes, which are taught much more like a seminar style in a college, in a writer's workshop or a literature workshop style. Some of them have about 22% now of our students have educational plans. We've noticed recently that we have a tendency to attract kids who, when they do the testing for special needs, they have very, very high verbal IQ, from above average to superior range, and their performance scores are average. And for many kids, those kids don't know how to learn anything that doesn't come easily to them, because they're so quick and they're so bright, that to be like the rest of us that really have to struggle through to get to information. They haven't learned those skills, and they often, the kids do fine till they get to the high school level, where the material gets a little more difficult, and then they become lost. And in our school, we try to help them, on the one hand, develop skills, and on the other hand, not feel so bad about themselves, because their self-esteem has often gone down. And on the third hand, maybe to keep them from getting involved in drugs and alcohol or other ways to numb themselves, because they're pretty confused about why they're not acting, since people keep saying to them, but you're so smart. And one thing that we've learned through the years is to stop telling kids that you're smart, because a lot of the kids are smart, but they don't know how to make the effort, and we're trying to help them make the effort. We have a lot of our kids are very creative. We always have kids going to drama school, to music school, to art school right out of college. The classes are heterogeneous, as you've heard in other places, with a pretty wide range of abilities within the same classes. Our English classes are 10th, 11th, and 12th grade mixed. And, I could talk about that later if people have questions about that. Some of our kids would have dropped out and are marginal. And as I said, others of them will go to, top Northeast colleges, and everybody in between. And the kids all work and learn together and help one another to learn. The other thing a couple of other things about our school. One is that there's a town meeting. It meets once a week. Everybody has a vote. I have one vote. Each student has a vote. Each staff person has a vote. That town meeting has made every rule that the school has. Now, that doesn't mean that, we can decide that you can smoke in the building, for example, because we would like, not that we want to, but because that is a state law. We can't supersede state law. But all the rules governing our school, like an admissions policy, like an affirmative action policy, like rules for running the meeting, like the planning for activities that goes on, a parent policy, an absence policy, certain curricular decisions happen in this town meeting after a discussion. And I'm going to show you a tape in a minute so that you get a flavor of what that town meeting is, and you can get an idea of what I mean. Secondly, you might be interested to know, I know someone want to know, our staff, the staff are all, we're a union school, and we're hired by the school system, and in the union, as someone said before, there may be union issues or questions that you have, but we work as other public employees of the Brookline school system. And but differently, I think, for most people, and probably for most people in this room, I was hired by students. The students hire the staff at our school. We have a hiring committee. We had one a year ago. There were 2 teachers, myself and the math teacher I'd mentioned, and 13 students that it did the entire process of hiring for an English position that we had open, which was our first one in 10 years. Before that, we've all been hired by students. And I know for some people that's pretty surprising, and I'd be glad to talk about that later if you'd like to know a little more about how that works and why it works that way, or about any of the other things that I mentioned. Let me show the tape, and then we'll go from there. This was for we were looking to get funding. The man that did this, Fred Churchill, is a former student, graduated in 1978. He's a documentary filmmaker, and he came in the school in 1990, I think, or so. One thing I want to tell you beforehand is we never got enough money to put the classes in, so I think you might notice it's not a long video at all, but it does not go, the footage that went into the classroom to really describe how our classes work never got into the video. So.
When my children were little, we'd be hanging out in the park, and inevitably some high school student would walk by with some blue hair or something, or drag by in a car. And these women, these mothers of other children, would sort of just leap into my arms and go, "How can you stand them?"
This is a videotape about the high school that I went to.
1 second here.
I'll be right down. I'm getting interviewed.
It's about teachers and students. It's about adolescence and education. And it's about democracy.
A week from Thursday, there'll be elections for staff, which is,
This is School Within a School, more commonly known as SWS. It's different from most public high schools. It has only 5 staff and just over 100 students. It resides on the 4th floor of Brookline High, a medium-sized public high school in Brookline, Massachusetts.
SWS is an alternative for people who want to make their own path, who want to say, I want to have a say in what goes on in my education. I want to have a say in what happens in my classrooms and the curriculum.
11 years after graduating, I went back to SWS for a reunion. Our school was 20 years old.
A number of you wouldn't know some of the present
I was
staff.
moved to see that SWS was still thriving, especially at a time when everyone is so concerned about the deterioration of our public schools. I realized then that if we could document the development of SWS, we could present it to parents and teachers who were looking for new ideas.
As many of you know,
the SWS teachers got a grant to write about SWS, and for years we've been saying we must write about SWS, we must write about SWS, and we got the money, and we are. And you are our experts. I mean, sorry, John Dewey, move over, because you're the people that we want to quote and hear from. So
SWS faces its third decade in a position different from most public high schools today. Student enrollment is up, parent satisfaction is high, teacher turnover is low, and instead of having to repair a bad situation, SWS is interested in sharing its success. This videotape introduces School Within a School as a model of democratic education. It is a short preview to some of the themes that will be explored more comprehensively in a one-hour documentary.
In a way, adolescence is a time when you first break into the opening of the big questions of, what is life, and what's my, work going to be, and what's the world like, and what's the nature of good and evil, and, what is compassion, what does it mean to be, a good person, or just a whole bunch of really deeply philosophical questions.
The reason why a lot of kids went into SWS is because they couldn't hack in the regular school. And that was because what they were doing was they were displaying their adolescence in incredibly diverse and uncontrollable ways. And in SWS, they were accepted for that.
It can contribute to people's notions that, Jews are...
I guess what I love particularly about adolescence is how much they're struggling with their values. They're stopping and saying, what does this mean? And I guess some people think of that as adolescent when they're saying something as adolescent in a bad way, like maybe a person's stuck because they're thinking and mulling and instead of get to work. And maybe so, but school's a place that you can do that. You can stop and go, wait a minute. What does this mean? Why do we value this over this? Doesn't this make you furious?
SWS gave us room to question things, whether it was school policy, world events, or personal issues. We could challenge ourselves and the people around us.
I think SWS gives you a lot. It was much better for me than downstairs. I have a real problem with the downstairs school where it's like teacher on one high level and then student really like much, further down on the totem pole. And if you're in a classroom where the teacher's always telling you what to do and deciding things for you, then and that you don't agree with, then what is the point of, you feel like, what's the point of being there?
Most of the students that come into SWS, I'd say the primary quality, I think, that I've seen is that they want to try something different. They want to find out about themselves. They want to test themselves, test the world around them. They're not going to sit back. They're not going to be passive.
So when I say can't hack it, in fact, what they may be doing is they may be particularly gifted and they may be particularly perceptive or talented. And that they're looking at learning as a process and they understand what learning is about and they feel frustrated in the regular school.
If it's a democracy, then everyone has a say in what happens. I think, that makes people more positive about education, about school.
Town meeting is sort of something that SWS was based on, and I feel, I think it's pretty self-evident as far as democracy working in a school, because I think it's worked in Brookline High School for the past, I don't know how many years, at least 10. And the way it works in SWS is a little bit more purely democratic as far as one person, one vote. And I think with a small group like SWS, it works out pretty well.
All right, if you want to make a proposal, just tell us. Say a proposal.
I think they should be allowed to finish painting the mural on the authorized wall, but I don't think that they should be allowed to touch the other wall. So that's what
we decided, that we wanted to fix up the lounge, and we had this whole discussion on what wall we were going to use, everyone had different opinions as to what could be painted over in the lounge. People that were going to do the mural passed around a little piece of paper that had the kind of design, and everyone thought that was very nice, and everyone looked forward to it. And then when we came back, after they had done the mural, it didn't look anything like that at all.
Basically, the issue that came up was we voted to give you this wall and our money and this space, So now, does that mural belong to us, or does it belong to you four?
So there was a real subtle moral issue being debated. The people are now very
This is
comfortable
Ralph
with the
Mosher,
process
who's a
of,
BU professor,
political self-governance of the
who
school.
helped us set up the
Feel
town
free
meeting.
to say, to have voice and vote. Sometimes when I see town meetings struggling with issues and getting impatient and frustrated with this very complex process and wanting someone, let Dave do it or let Ellen do it, I could appreciate the frustration that people were feeling with the process, but it is the essential, basic political and social participatory process that distinguishes American society.
When I joined SWS, attendance at town meeting was optional. By the time I graduated, we had voted to make participation mandatory. A few years later, town meeting was implemented for all of Brookline High School.
I now can direct more than 40.
As I watched the celebration of our school's 20th birthday, I thought about my high school days. We were rebellious, struggling to learn about democracy and trying to keep our school open. We were known as freaks, and there was considerable conflict between SWS and the rest of the school. But this has changed. Now there is much more acceptance of the students and teachers in SWS, even if they still seem a little different. And each year, so many students apply to SWS that there isn't room for all of them. Why has it grown so popular, I wondered? Is it still an alternative school? What are the hopes and aspirations now, given greater acceptance and new challenges in education today?
20 years is a long time to bill itself as an alternative school, and I think it stays healthy. It needs to stay healthy by asking itself, what are we an alternative to? What are we doing here? And not many institutions, large or small, can do that, especially an institution that is born out of conflict, which SWS was born out of.
People started to see us maybe less as alternative, but just as a good way to have a school. This seems to work. Not necessarily people who saw themselves as alternative or 60s type or even rebellious types started to say, all I know is that my son now goes to school, and so this must be a good place.
In large urban or suburban high schools where there's no sense of self and no sense of purpose other than, you go to your class and you learn the information and then you spit it back, is just not going to be what works and will not give kids the skills that they need for being either the leaders or the followers of tomorrow.
If I hadn't joined SWS, I think I would be a little less aware of what's out there. I would have less expectations, I think, of college and of what could be in the classroom.
It's more than just the classroom. After coming out of SWS, you come out with, 5 friends. You don't come out with 5 teachers.
I'm cognizant of the fact that you all have been sitting all day and taking in information, and that's a very different style than the SWS style that we espouse and that we use. So what I thought I'd like to do for a few minutes is, you did see that, I forget what they call those, but that was a 10-minute trailer or something to send to some educational people to see if we could get some money. That's why the little blocks were in it. It didn't explain who was the professor at Boston University and who was the student and all. I've told you we have a hiring committee where we hire our own students. We have alumni, a large percentage of whom have gone into teaching in one form or another. And a lot of whom are interested in change wherever they are. They came back and told us that they changed things. Another thing is our parent policy is probably different from any other school that you've heard, which is that we ask parents not to be involved. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't know the parents and that we're not in touch with them, but we hold the students accountable, and we go directly to our students for their responsibilities, whether it's attendance or how they're doing in classes, and teachers go directly to them. They don't, very rarely, unless they're really falling apart, go to the parents with the call home. We don't send progress reports home. We do regular grades, and we do. So I'm giving you some information that's interesting. What I'd like you to do is turn to the person next to you and just take 5 minutes or so and reflect on that, or perhaps on something else that you heard about today. And either I'd like you to then have a question that you'd like to ask me about what you heard, but you know, I think it would be good to bounce it off of another person. So either come up with a question that you think other people might also like to know more about, or a comment about something that doesn't make any sense for you, because I think it's so much more richer if we could hear some questions like, this is all great, but you know, we could never do that in the school I'm in because, for example, none of this in my school will work unless the teachers volunteer for it and the students volunteer. And you might come up with something else that did, but I would want someone to say to me, what if you're in a school district that would only assign people? So I can tell you, don't bother. Or change the way your school district assigns people. But I'm thinking about the fact that, you know, you can sit all day and hear some wonderful things. You might be in school now and you know, here at Misericordia, and there must be some things that don't quite make sense to you yet. So either if you feel really brave, you can turn to someone you don't know, or most people probably are sitting next to someone you do, but, you know, think for a minute and tell each other, talk about it, and I'll walk around, and then maybe in 5 or 10 minutes I'll come back, and I think that'll give people a little movement too. Okay? And I'd also like to ask, I know for the video people are really we're going to drive them crazy because he's trying to do a video and won't be able to see us, and we'll try to move the mic around. But I would also ask you in the same SWS spirit, if you would say your name just so other people know you, or maybe where you're from when you ask a question, or the question of your group.
Okay, Katie Roberts, Long Island. We were wondering, what's the criteria to get in? What is the criteria to get into your SWS?
To get into our SWS, first I should say the criteria were developed by the students in the town meeting, and it's revised by the students in the town meeting. It's a lottery system and the students have to sign up, go to 3 classes, an English class, the town meeting, and 1 other class, and they have to come to a meeting on a particular day at a particular time with a questionnaire already filled out. There are no actual academic requirements, and basically the students have those requirements because what they felt was, can you sign up? If you can't get up to the place, then it's not going to work for you. If you can't come to a meeting at a particular time with your paper, then you can't get to a class on time with your homework. And those are how the criteria, and visiting the classes was for you to see the style and to see what we emphasize, active learning and speaking in class a lot, actively participating. Is that something that you want? If you're a shy person, that's fine, as long as you know that people are going to be encouraging you to speak and learn to speak more and to learn to interact and to talk to one another, not just face the teacher. Those kinds of things. And if that works out well for you, then we do a lottery. The lottery, also from our town meeting, is 50% male-female. So we do keep a pretty close to 50% gender balance because one year when we didn't, the school just didn't work as well. And we have an affirmative action policy which says that if the school is not, through the lottery, at least 1/3 minority and foreign born, which mirrors in an approximate way the population at Brookline High School, then we take people from the list until it is. This year, for example, we're 36% minority and foreign born, and we did not need to use our affirmative action policy. And in fact, that's one of the things that we've been working on in the last few years. And this year we have, I forget what's my statistic. 10% of our students are Boston students with the METCO program, and about 16%, I believe, are African American. And we're really happy about that. I think for the same reason that someone said before, that it's already hard to be in a high school where you're a minority and to then go to a place that's seen as a little different, and to leave your group is taking risks. But a lot of the kids that are attracted to us are people that are attracted to a little bit, to being a little different, taking a risk, not just hanging out with the Russian kids. I came here because I didn't come to America to learn to keep speaking Russian with all my Russian friends, kind of thing. So, thank you. Another question.
Yes, my name is Pete Bovine, and the question I had was associated with parental involvement. I am fascinated in that you do not encourage the parental involvement, where you would think that the parents themselves would be role models and encourage the students, and if there were difficulties or problems, that they'd be one of the key assistants in making it successful.
It is unusual, and it's very hard to describe. Believe me that at our parents' meeting, which is going to happen a week from Monday, there's a lot of questions about the policy, and luckily there are other parents there that sort of explain how things work. And I would say on the one hand that I know almost all the parents of my students, and one way or another speak to them, but as I said before, the policy we've developed is to really make the students responsible. And when kids get to this age, you may have noticed, those that work with them, they are very often very resistant in their home to their own parents. My child to me, or your child to you, but not your child to me, or vice versa. And what we found is that by having another set of adults in their lives, we are able to often make the same suggestions and move kids that are having troubles in a different way from the way parents can at home. We're still expecting that parents in the home are doing what parents are supposed to do, that they're letting us know any of their concerns, but we rarely, if ever, unless it's, and the kids know this, except for any issue with safety or health, we'll call immediately, and the students know that. We always go to the student and say, almost always, go to the student and say, I'm going to be calling your home, here's why, what do you think of that, what would you like me to do or not do? There's a myriad of benefits. Once in a while, you know, as people know, you find out that the kid breaks down and tells you, my mother's going to beat the you-know-what out of me if you call, could you not call? And there's something that you haven't known before that you need to know. Whether it's true or not, there's some real problem there. Once in a while, you are able to present something in a way that makes that student look better and helps promote his or her self-esteem. We say to parents, we're really trying to work with you as partners, but we find when the students don't have that surprise of walking through the door and finding out that the progress report just came home, or Mrs. Smith has called from Spanish class to say that, you know, you're failing, but forgot to tell the student first, and you know, all heck breaks loose at the home, that kids get further in their education. So, but I know it's an unusual policy, and for example, the other day, a parent called me and said, I know I'm not supposed to call, but I was a little concerned because I did get a call from one of the main school teachers about my son, and I was able to say, thank you for calling. We have a medical concern about your child. We've seen X, Y, and Z behavior, and find out, in fact, in that child's past there had been a history of some epilepsy, and began to put something together and say, we've seen a different behavior this year from last year with your child, please go get a medical exam, get back to us, we'll do this here. So it's not, I don't want to at all imply that, you're a parent, you give us your child, and, you come back at graduation and say either thank you or nice try. But that the focus is on the responsibility of that student to change and to grow and to learn to self-advocate and to say what that student needs, and to also not blame parents and not turn everything that if only it were something, if only I had control over my life, things would be better. We have some rebellious kids, and when we take away some, many are, one way or another, when you take away that blame, then they're kind of stuck with themselves. And then they're kind of stuck with, oh, I guess there's something here, maybe I need to change. So, I don't know, are there other questions on this weird parent policy we have, or, yeah?
They do go into the mainstream with the other students. They
Yeah.
are not restricted. Is it just for like cafeteria or gym or?
Our students take, thank you. Our students take English, math, and most of them take English, math, and social studies with us. One of our former students is now our chemistry teacher, teaches half-time with us. And the rest of their classes, language, most of the sciences, gym, art, drama, comprehensive high school, they take in the main school. You heard the young woman say downstairs, and that's because we're up on the 4th floor and separated. That's how they will refer to my downstairs classes.
And they have the same teacher the 3 or 4 years that they're with you?
When they're with us, we have one math teacher. So you take sophomore, junior, and senior math. Now, if you're in, if you want, when you get to senior year, to take statistics instead of 4th year math, you could go to the main school and take statistics. What we ask, what the town meeting has said is you must have 2 classes and town meeting with us. And we save a block that includes town meeting and some staff time and student committee time. So all the kids are in committees, or many of them are in committees. There's a committee that runs the town meeting. There's a committee that meets with students. There's a lot of peer pressure here. There's a committee of students called the review committee that meets with students who are in danger of failing either academically or having social major problems, supports them. And in the end, those 8 people and 1 staff person make the decision if someone has to leave SWS. I don't have that control. Again, it's not hierarchical. And so they have a lot of time with us and a lot of focus in SWS, but then they are like any other student in the Spanish class in the main school. Do you have more questions about that? Does that?
I think that kind of answers what we were just wondering if, the other students, if they were segregated or discriminated against in that respect.
That's sort of a different question. Sometimes kids, I don't think now, in the past I think sometimes kids now are, for example, kids will isolate them and say, you were in our social group and then you joined SWS and we're mad at you because you've left the group. And they have a little trouble with that. Sometimes our students will do things like say, I'm in SWS now and we can sign out whenever we want so I can cut your class, which doesn't do too well, and really gives us a bad name in the main school. And if you were to go into our community, you'd hear a very wide range of ideas and rumors about the school. Everybody knows it's successful. Just to sort of give you an idea, even though it was many years ago, when the first day on the job, this is what I heard in the first day. Well, the trouble with SWS is that you have all the best kids in the school and you siphon off all those kids that are sort of running the yearbook and on the sports team, and they're just the best and the brightest, and if it weren't for you, we would have much more going on in the main school. It's all your fault. It's really great that your school is there because you take away all the kids that have all the problems and are really different, and so the rest of us can teach. Thought, oh, that's sort of interesting. And it went on from there, so there were 4 or 5 or 6 different perspectives on the school. By now, I think people know SWS is a place that a lot of our kids are see things a little bit from their own perspective, maybe had either because they have trouble with authority, maybe because they want to learn and be very involved in the classroom, which if you're a teacher means, for example, if I start picking on one of the other kids in the class and you can't stand because it's a bad day for me or because I shouldn't be doing it and I did it as a teacher, you can't stand that and you don't think it's fair, so you speak right up and you say to me, you shouldn't be doing that. So you're in trouble, and the teacher really, if you talk to the student will say, she's picking on that kid, I can't stand it. So, and kids that might be seen as a little different, often for some good reasons. So some of those kids are with us, kids that are artistic. Look, I love the cello. What I really want to do with my life is play the cello or, the guitar or paint, and I'm going to come to school, but don't treat me like I have to be an A student. I'll be there, I'll be involved, but know what it is that I love. And sometimes that isn't as translatable in a larger school, or sometimes that's not as acceptable, that we think that all kids should be, just wanting to do their best in every subject.
My name is Betsy Cochran, and our group wanted to know if the staff, is it highly labor intensive, and how many hours does the staff really work?
I think that's one of the biggest questions. When I was saying last night, when we were a few of us that are speaking the next day, in this day or two, it for me is the biggest question, and I think that it would be unfair to say that it's not in a certain way labor intensive. And I think the way, I would say to work at a school like this, you have to really be interested in your students as people, be interested in your subject matter, and want to develop your own curriculum. I mean, even though our math teacher teaches a curriculum that is the same as a main school math teacher, the way he does it and the amount of involvement and the amount of thought that he's putting into it is different from some people, and not all people. There's many good teachers all over. But it does take a belief in wanting to get to know all your students, and it does take a belief that you're going to be spending a certain amount of your private time, correcting the papers, figuring things out. Not to mention that in, I think all the schools you've heard, we have our own graduation, we have an overnight, one of our favorite times for staff, and we have paper readings at night where we all come, and kids and staff and sometimes parents come, and it's very relaxed. We'll have 20, 30, 40, 50 people, and everybody brings some cookies, and the kids will read the papers that they've written. We do a wide variety. We're thinking of a day away where we go down into Boston, and there's an exhibit about prejudice and about being a bystander in prejudicial situations that we're going to go to, and then have some discussions, and then maybe go and have a more fun activity like a scavenger hunt around Boston. And that if he can answer this, we all knew that kind of skill was what we were looking for. So it can work. Yes.
When you're recruiting these teachers, are they from the downstairs school, or is it open recruitment? Do you advertise?
We always, actually one of the questions that we wondered recently was, if someone were going to be what we call RIFT, reduction in force, I don't know if you use that, if the school had didn't have enough money to pay all the teachers that were on the payroll in the main school, whether they would have insisted through the union that we take a teacher from the main school. As it happened, we never got to that point. So I don't know finally what the decision might have been about that, but we advertised within the school for that 1-year position. There wasn't anyone that was interested, and then we went outside the school, and we were able to bring someone in who's a wonderful teacher and will now be integrated part-time with us and part-time, we hope, and part-time with the main school and teach English with them. So we've been able to bring people in, but we're certainly would be open to having students from the, quote, downstairs school. I think I mentioned when I was talking to you guys that there are two of the teachers in the Brookline High School now are our former students, and one of them is teaching, as I said, half-time with us now, and the kids keep going over to the other woman and they see her picture. And my office is filled with pictures of our former students. I take those big 20 by 30 poster pictures at our graduation, and there's about 15 of them up on the walls, and they all see her and go, oh, is that Miss Gorman? And I say, yes, you know. So they now are all going up to her and saying, well, you know, we have to have a Spanish course for SWS now, and obviously you have to teach it. And they sometimes approach other teachers and say, you know, you should be in SWS. Let's see what we can do so we could bring you in. So they see a certain style of teaching, and they're more than willing to co-opt them or grab them over. And funding probably is the limit in that. And then,
do you do advisory groups?
we have talked about that for a long time, and we've never quite set it up, but we wish we did. But the getting stuck in this 15-minute block has kept us really from ever doing it. What we do is senior advisory groups. Each teacher takes a group for, what are we calling it this year? Next Step, or the 13th step, or next year, because we didn't want to call it, for a while we called them college groups, but we realized that that was not a fair assumption. Our kids go to college at the same rate to kids in the main school. It's about 76%, but our students are much more likely to take a year off, defer for a year, do a city year program, work, and then try to save some money to spend a little time, you know, working in Guatemala or doing some good, or preparing themselves before they just go off to college. Any other comments? Yes, Jerry.
I don't think I introduced myself before. I'm Jerry Mintz from Alternative Education Resource Organization in New York. How does your democratic system work in terms of, do you have, that we were wondering about, do you have a Supreme Court? Is it really evolved like that? Is there a constitution, that sort of thing?
We're very oral. We don't even have the kids were just saying the other day, we don't have a written set of rules except one piece of paper that keeps falling off the wall, and it's almost entirely an oral tradition. I don't recommend that. I can't quite explain it, but we seem somehow to just go along from year to year with a quite massive set of rules and traditions around both our town meeting and other things, but we don't have a lot written down. We do not have a constitution per se. We do have a set of ways that the school works that we send to kids at the beginning of the year and that we work on every year. And when things change, for example, now in Massachusetts we have something called time and learning, where each student in Massachusetts must spend 990 hours in the classroom on a broadly based academic program, and in order, rather than change our whole schedule, in order to reach that, our students have to develop a full program, and they get points for their sports or for clubs they belong to or courses they take outside of school, etc. And we needed to figure out what they're doing in the main school is putting kids in study halls if they don't have enough hours. And that doesn't match our philosophy. So now that goes to town meeting, and now we develop a new set of rules. But, you know, you'd also, someone would ask a question about something, and, you know, like the students that had been there for 3 years will go, wait, didn't we decide that 2 years ago? And then one of the other teachers will say, no, wait, no. And then Steve, you know, our student from 1980, who's now a teacher, will say, no, I think we decided that. Remember when I was here and Maves? No, that's so. We are pretty flexible. But, I mean, you could also describe it as kind of an oral tradition that saves the worthwhile changes. We've had to be flexible over the years. We've changed with the needs of our students. And that was probably another reason that we're still there. We've always held on to democracy. We've always held on to getting to know our students as people and, our basic values. But we have changed the way that we've taught. We find most of our students need more structure now. We probably give many more quizzes and tests than we used to. If you came into the math class now, in spite of the orchestra leader, he also has to give many more quizzes and tests and check homework more than he used to when kids just sort of did it because they were part of the school. We find kids are more grade conscious. We also find that actually they probably do more work than in some ways than they did before. So we are constantly trying to see where students are now. They've had such different experiences, or even tracing back. There was a point where we realized that kids that were born or at a certain point when Watergate happened were very negative. And we sort of were trying to figure out, or two or 3 years ago in Brookline, there were 3 separate deaths in the 8th grade, tragedies. And we now have a set of kids that we know have a lot of trouble with loss, and we'll be very open about that. And we're looking at that even when we're looking at the books that we're teaching. If there's a book that deals with a lot of loss, we think, well, let's think of who's in the room now and how we're going to have to look at that. So we're always talking a lot, and that's the flip side of having this very oral tradition. Yes.
I may be off base, but my guess is that in this part of Pennsylvania, even though many people may be attracted to the idea, one of the fears would be that someone else might be elected to a school board, and a year later it would be shut down. So I guess the question is there some way of building up in a procedure to initiate a progressive school such as this, such that it would protect the school for a number of years, kind of despite the rather rapid changes in the electorate on the school board?
I think we might have to go back to the example we heard this morning, and I would guess that if a school came from teachers and students and parents who had an interest in a particular kind of school that you felt would work, whatever progressive would mean for your community for at that point, and you could develop a school that had the kind of power that we heard about this morning, where, and I think Len said the same thing, somebody went to the superintendent and said they need an assistant here. What I'm saying is that if something is top down, if someone in a building, a superintendent, a school board member, the principal comes in and says, okay, we're going to start a new school and this is what it's going to be, you'll have a very different experience from some way, and I know that's not easy, of looking at a group of teachers that are excited about an idea and something that they share together, and some students that need and would want to be in that experience. And if you can have that kind of groundswell and some supports, I think that you stand a much better chance of that school board member or that change not just being able to get rid of you, but at least saying, okay, we'll give you another year. I think, I don't know if other people, I'm sure there are people in the audience that, Daria, did you want to comment on it?
Yeah, I wanted to comment on it. Once you begin the restructuring process, what happens is that when you make as I said in the earlier, you must make the 3 to 5 year commitment to the restructuring process. Once you begin that restructuring process, it does not matter who the players are. When you begin to focus on what the focus is of your school, then whoever comes into that process just has to take part in that focus. It doesn't matter whether or not school board members get reelected every 2 years or the superintendent retires or whatever happens. Once the structure is set up by all the players involved, the community, the teachers, the superintendents, then that flows with the rest of it.
Now we're going to hear from the man that just told us that he gets, every time you gotten a lot of people, right, to get together and start a school. So tell us the secret.
Well, Daria, that's not the way it happens. If you get a thing past the school board and they say, okay, we're going to do it for 3 or 5 years, and there's a new election, a new school committee comes in, and they'll kill it. Say for Jerry and I,